Hello and welcome to the Sales Lab from Homebridge Financial, where we discuss the best sales ideas, strategies, and solutions for today's housing market. Our program is designed to share the best practices in market intelligence with builders and new home sales professionals so you can find success regardless of market conditions. Our host is Anthony Grast, National Sales Director for Homebridge Financial's Builder Division, who will lead in today's conversation. Subscribe to this podcast or bookmark this link so you can find your way back for future episodes. And now our host, Anthony.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sales Lab from Homebridge Financial, where we share the best sales ideas, strategies, and solutions for today's market. My name is Anthony Grast, host of the program. Today's topic is all about follow-up in the sales process and how to make it an easy and effective habit. I've invited on to come speak and join us on our program is Jeff Shore. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Shore Consulting. He's one of the top new home sales trainers and consultancies in the United States, works with hundreds of builders all across North America, is considered, in my opinion, one of the leading experts in this area. Jeff is also an author and has written numerous books, Be Bold and Win the Sale, The 4-2 Formula, and his latest book, Follow Up and Close the Sale. I love this book. I've been reading it twice over in the last couple of weeks and have really found a lot of great information in the book. And what I like about this is the simplicity of the ideas Jeff presents. Jeff, welcome to our program.
Anthony, thanks so much. Looking forward to it. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I read this book and we were talking off air, I didn't know whether I'd be crying because this was a confessional or we were going to talk about some of the ideas.
Right.
But you get into the follow-up and the ideas that you present are so spot on. But here's a question. Let's just jump into it. Today's market, we are overrun with demand. It's a hurricane of demand. Salespeople are overrun with leads, overrun with activities. Builders have little to no inventory, are pre-selling. Why is follow-up so important? I mean, is this just something we do in the slow markets, or is this something we work on all the time?
Yeah, it's really an important question, Anthony, because you could look at it and sort of slide into the answer by asking, why do you do follow-up at all? Why do you follow up ever, regardless of market conditions? And I think too often we look at it and say, well, I know why to do follow-up because I want another sale. And I get it. We're sales professionals who want another sale. That's just not how I look at follow-up. And so it's just in the premise of the book, what is follow-up? Why is follow-up? And to me, the premise is very simple. It's serve. Follow-up is a way to serve your customer. It's not just about how to pad your pockets. Now, listen, if you serve your customer well, you'll be paid well, but it's all about serving. So when we ask why follow up in a market like this, then we just simply have to change that and say, why serve in a market like this? Or to put it another way, is the degree to which you choose to serve your customer dependent upon how easy it is to get a sale? So it's really, there's a sort of a character answer that goes beyond the very practical or financial answer.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book, and this is a really important part. So in the first third of the book, you talk about mindset, and this is exactly what you're talking about, that we prove our care by how we serve. Yeah. And in that section, one thing that really stood out to me, which really got me thinking about the sales process, is you said that people do not begin their sales journey based on their current dissatisfaction, but by the emotions around their future promise. What do you mean by that?
Well, so what happens here is that we think about what's wrong with our life right now, and I could list it on a piece of paper. I think about what I want my life to look like in the future, and I could list it in a piece of paper. But the things that we write down are going to be the facts. They're true, but they're the facts. That's not how we make our decision. We make our decision based on the emotion that's underlying beneath those facts. That's the idea. So even as we're recording this right now, Anthony, my wife and I are in full-blown car shopping mode. We're thinking about replacing her car. And so as we're out there looking, what's happening when you're test driving a car, right? Where is that emotion of the future promise of what your life could look like? But what happens As soon as you're done, then the emotion starts to wane. And without that reconnection, then you sort of forget what that's like. And so we are emotional creatures. We make decisions according to our emotion. And it's critical for sales professionals that they can connect with their customer on that emotional level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that from you, and I've read that in your books. There was another book I read called Switch, which had
Hmm.
a great discussion around human behavior. And
Right.
we make decisions based on emotion and justify logically, which means the
Yeah.
simplicity of the path. And I love that, because that is such an important thing to remember. One thing in your book that you raised that I read and reread and read again was your section about emotional altitude
Yeah.
and how it's tied to follow up. Can you give us a little detail on this? And what is
Yeah.
emotional altitude?
Yeah, I think that first of all, that question, what is emotional altitude, is a really important question for sales professionals everywhere. If you don't really get the concept of emotional altitude, you're going to have a very hard time selling in any situation. But the idea is that if people buy on emotion, and they do, we had a conversation with a Swedish researcher, Martin Lindstrom, and he hooked people up to functional MRI so he could read brainwaves while they were making purchase decisions. And about 85% of the decision was made from the emotional core, supported by 15% logic. So we're emotionally driven creatures, whether we want to believe it or not. So then we asked the question, well, if we're emotionally driven creatures, when are we going to buy? We're going to buy when that emotional altitude, which measures the degree of positive emotion as we're engaging in a decision, we're going to buy when that emotional altitude is high. And so when is the emotional altitude at its highest point? That's really what we have to look at. And so
Mhm.
for sales professionals who are watching right now, you got to ask yourself that question. Where is that? When does that happen? When is the emotional altitude at its highest point? Because the purpose of follow up then is to sustain emotional altitude. So, if, for example, I'm shopping for a home, I'm looking at the home and I'm imagining what my future is going to look like, right? I'm thinking about my future promise. I'm thinking about how great this is going to be, how wonderful my life is going to be. And emotionally, there's this welling up. The customer may not show it to the salesperson, but inside there's that, oh, this is really, really nice, right?
Mhm.
But as soon as they leave, what happens? That emotional altitude starts to wane. And the more time that goes by without reconnecting with the customer through follow up, the more likely it is that the emotional altitude will just fizzle into nothing. But when we are prompt with our follow up, what happens? We sustain that emotional altitude. We re engage the customer's emotional altitude, and that dramatically increases the chance that we'll be able to solve their problem.
Yeah, and that was the point that really stuck out to me, that, sustaining that altitude with
Yeah.
your follow-up, again, because people are making decisions emotionally, and
Yeah.
that's why it's so important on the follow-up. You have a section in there, in your strategy section, you get into extending the conversation, and we'll
Right.
get into this a bit. The one thing that just stood out to me, and to me personally, this was probably the most important point that I learned in the book, is you talked about easy equals right for
Yeah.
decisions. And
Hmm.
in the book, we talk on the elimination, you talk about active elimination versus passive elimination. So active
Yeah.
elimination is where people, just choose they can't do it, whatever it's going on.
Mhm.
Passive is probably a more traditional
Yeah.
problem we have. What's a good strategy for not getting eliminated? And maybe you can expand a little bit on that easy equals right as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, with active elimination, it's going to happen. Again, going into our car buying mode here, there are cars that we have actively eliminated because every customer, when they're shopping, it doesn't matter what you're shopping for, deep down, there is this unspoken, what I call a hierarchy of needs, where I can identify what is most important in my value scope, what's most important to me. And there are times when I'll see something that I'll go, you know what, we saw a car here just a couple of days ago, a great car, incredible price, loaded, but it's the wrong color. And it forced us to ask the question, how important is color in our hierarchy of needs? And we decided we cannot take that color. We would not be happy in the long run. That's active elimination. If you're the salesperson for that car, there's nothing you can do about that. If I have actively eliminated you because it does not meet my needs, okay. Passive elimination happens when I just plain forget about you. That's what happens when there is no follow-up. The emotional altitude wanes, along with it, the memory wanes. And so now I'm just like, who was that person? What was that car? What was that home? Whatever it happens to be. And that's unforgivable. That is inexcusable to be passively eliminated. If you're a sales professional and a customer actively eliminates you and you understand why, and it's legit, you're not going to get them all. But to be passively eliminated, that you can't let that happen.
Right.
Now, to your question of easy equals right, you know, Anthony, we've talked about it before that I'm very, very big on consumer psychology and the way that people make decisions.
Mhm.
And the human brain is just this amazing energy conserving machine. The human brain is always asking the question, what's the easiest way to do anything at all? We are always looking for easy. And so we follow this heuristic, this decision-making rule of thumb in real time that causes us to make quicker decisions that we are more comfortable with. And that rule of thumb is that easy equals right. The easier something seems to me, or the simpler something seems to me, the righter it feels to me. So this is why if you look at a mortgage professional, for example, one of the things that great mortgage professionals do is that they take a complex product or a complex process and they break it down into easy steps, right? So they can look at it and say, can I just tell you, when it comes to getting approval, there's just 3 things you want to think about. Now, look, before you go any further, what did you just do? You took something to a customer that feels really, really scary, and you introduced it in a way to say, there's just 3 things you need to think about it. Right now, from that perspective, what happens to the customer? Oh, 3, I can handle 3. And so easy equals right. So now if you come along and say, you know what we want to know here? Uh, how are you going to pay the money back? Do you have a history of paying the money back? What happens if you don't pay the money back? That's it. Now, look, I'm making this up. This is your lane, not mine, Anthony. But the idea here is that the more we can present things to our customers in ways that are easy for them to digest, the more appropriate it feels right to them when we do it that way.
Absolutely. In fact, after reading your book, I put a little note on my desk, and everything that I'm sending out now, my message that as I'm writing is simplicity, right? Make it simple, make it easy. And you're absolutely right on that. Now, in your strategy section, you were talking about emotional altitude and following up. You talk about speed. Why is speed so important in our follow-up?
Yeah, this is one of 2 what I call follow-up superpowers for salespeople. And the reason that speed is so critically important is because of what we were talking about earlier. This is connected to emotional altitude. So that emotional altitude begins to wane as soon as somebody walks out the door. The speed of follow-up is going to be so very, very important. And a lot of salespeople, they'll look and they'll say, yeah, I get back to everybody within 48 hours or 24 hours. And I will look and say 24, 48 hours, that's an eternity for somebody who's actively shopping and about to make a major purchase decision. So that speed sustains that emotional altitude. It keeps you more deeply connected to that customer and reminds them of the journey that they are on in the first place. So I would argue that if we look at speed, you don't need to look at 24 hours. I think maybe 4 hours is much, much more appropriate. And actually, and I say this in the book, there's something that I call taillight follow-up. If somebody just left your sales center, you could text them immediately that just says, hey, thanks for stopping by. I really enjoyed that conversation. As I mentioned, I'll call you at 5 o'clock with it, whatever you set up there for the next follow-up. So what did you just do? You thank them. You let them know that that conversation meant something to you. You confirm the appointment. You put your phone number into their phone so that they know who you are. You did that all in less than 30 seconds at 0 cost. That's follow-up. That extends the conversation and sets up what's going to happen next. So the idea of 24 hours, it's just too long. It's too long. The emotional altitude has waned way too much in 24 hours.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. I think that immediate contact is so powerful, but speed is only half of it.
Right.
In the book, you get into personalization.
Right.
Why is personalization so important in the follow-up?
Yeah, so it's two superpowers, speed and
Mhm.
personalization. And I just want to encourage sales professionals in this part of the conversation. This is the fun part, or it should be the fun part. That personalization asks the question, how do I make sure that the follow up is about the customer more than it is about my product? So often follow up is, I don't think I told you this, or how great is this? And I'm not saying that there's no value in that, but the better value is in connecting to that customer and what they are going through, what their experience is like.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, what we find here is that follow up looks like, hey, just checking in. My friend Art Subject calls that the parole officer follow up method, just checking in. And
Yeah.
I had that happen to me with a car. Now, the good news is this guy called me 4 hours later. So the speed was there, but the call was to say, so just want to check, did you want to buy it? And I looked at it and I went, whose needs are you serving right now? If I
Mhm.
wanted to buy it, I probably would have called you. But if you had called and said, hey, I'm just interested in your journey, and you had said this about your journey, so I want to ask you about that. Now I'm more inclined to have a conversation. So the idea here is that when we don't know our customer well enough, it becomes very difficult to personalize the conversation. But if we do know the customer well enough, then what happens? The personalization becomes fun because I'm solving problems that the customer hasn't even brought up. I'm
Mhm.
providing solutions that they don't even know about. They didn't even thought about at this point. If I know that customer well, I connect more deeply over here. This comes down to either something about their life, their dissatisfaction, where they're living now, whatever it happens to be. But it also comes down to what they want their life to look like, and it can be something that's really fun. I'm thinking right now of a couple with a teenage daughter who is totally into K-pop. Come on, Anthony, let's test your cultural literacy. Do you have any idea what K-pop is?
It's a Korean boy pop band.
There you go. Okay. So there's this band called BTS. I know this because my niece is totally into BTS. And this young lady comes up in the conversation. She is all about BTS. And so what does the salesperson do? Just does a quick little online search and finds out, hey, BTS is coming to a different part of the state. I don't know if you knew that. Just want to let you know. Now, look, is that going to get the sale? No, probably not that one thing. But what is it going to do? It's going to step in and say, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about your life and about your needs. I care. I out care everybody else that's out there. Now that's one silly little example, but as you look at it, when you know your customer well, you should be able to ask the question, what is my customer going through right now? What would benefit them? How can I serve them in ways that they're not even expecting? That's when follow-up gets fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And a whole nother subject for another time is really on the questions in engaging buyers, because that's when you can pick up that information and
Totally.
really add that personalization, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
So thank you. So that's great. We're now, I want to talk a little bit, switch gears here and talk a little bit about execution.
Yeah.
Because as I was reading the book and then you get into the execution stage, we're all aware there's a number of ways to follow up. There is the phone, and people have fear of the phone.
Mhm.
There is email, and there is text. And I've noticed, myself included, I
Yeah.
default to what I'm comfortable with.
Right.
So give me your thoughts on when we should be using, or how we should be using these follow-up options.
Well,
When is voice better than text, or text better than
sure.
voice?
Yeah. Well, you hit on something really, really important there, Anthony, and that is that we do tend to make the decision based on our own comfort levels above everything else. And this is a tremendous disservice to the customer. Evidence for that, by the way, that this is what we tend to do.
Mhm.
The number one medium that we use to communicate with the customer in follow up is email. Oh, by the way, it is the least effective way to follow up with a customer because it's not getting opened, right? Only about 15% of emails even get looked at, and even those sometimes just for a couple of seconds. If that form email, we call it follow-up because we send an email that says, thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions or whatever, that's itching for a delete button right there. So what we have to do is we have to, the maxim that I put in the book is let the message determine the method. So what am I trying to communicate here to a customer? Then ask, what's the most effective way to do that? So I talk in the book about what I call the communication hierarchy. And we start with face-to-face, right? Face-to-face is always going to be the most effective. Second to that, video to video. Third to that, voice to voice. So all of those are what the author Jeb Blunt calls synchronous communication styles. There's back and forth in real time. Then you get into asynchronous, a video message of some kind, a voicemail, a text message, email. All of those require the customer then to take the initiative on a response, but they don't have to do those things. So what you want to do here is when you're thinking about the method, you want to ask yourself, for what I want to communicate here, how high up that chain can I go? Right? So if I'm just trying to confirm an appointment, I probably don't need to say, hey, can we get on a video chat? And then say, this video chat purpose is to make sure that we're still talking at 4 o'clock today. That would not make any sense. In that case, a text message is quite appropriate. But if I'm looking at it and saying, I want to show something to my client that I haven't shown yet before, and we can't get them in here face to face, then a video to video is a very, very appropriate way to do that. So the rule is, how high up on the communication hierarchy can you get? That's the question. And if you can't get face to face and you can't get video to video, then what's next? It's phone to phone. It's talking to somebody on the telephone. And I got to tell you, it is so much more powerful than texting or email or anything along those lines. And yet the discomfort level of the salesperson, more often than not, is going to prevent that from happening. Sorry. I'm telling you right now, make the phone call. Make the phone call. What is old is new again. Make the phone call.
Yeah, absolutely. And, most people hesitate, as you said, to pick up the phone and to call, but it is truly one of the most effective ways there is. We've just done.
Can I say one other thing about that, Anthony, too? The reason I think salespeople are concerned about that is that they don't want to sound like a telemarketer, right? They don't want to think of this like intrusion marketing. And my advice is, if you don't want to sound like a telemarketer, don't sound like a telemarketer. But here's the idea. The only reason that you would sound like a telemarketer is because you didn't do your relationship job up front. But if you had that trust relationship built into the conversation, then the follow-up phone call is not going to be an intrusion. It's going to be something that's welcome because you are serving at heart.
Well, that's a great point. When you raise an additional really strong point in the book about, if you don't want to sound like a telemarketer, you don't want to be memorizing scripts. And a lot of salespeople, and when I first had sales training, it was around memorizing scripts, but you sound very mechanical. In there, you suggest, a different way to follow up, talking points. Can you expand a bit on that for me?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's such an important conversation. And like you, Anthony, same thing. Here's a script, memorize it, use it. And of course, we all know that your customer can smell that from a mile away. But I would argue that when it comes to messages to the customer, if you're doing this right, you cannot use a script. Why? Because appropriate follow-up is personalized. How do you have there's no such thing as a personalized script. A script by definition is not personalized. So if we're doing our job right here, you don't need a script. Let's look at it this way. If you were selling to your sister, you probably wouldn't be reading a script. You would be leveraging the relationship and talking about your sister's life. This is what we're talking about right here. If I know my customer well enough and I want to solve my customer's problem, I don't need any kind of script. I can just stay with what I need for that customer. And frankly, if you're in the sales professional and you don't know how to have that kind of natural, organic conversation, you have a bigger problem than anybody can solve by buying and reading a book.
Right.
Was that too harsh?
No, I no, that's, I mean, and these are all things that we wrestle with. And I think when people could, one thing I like to do is just have some talking points, and it makes the conversation very natural. In
Completely agree. The strategy point's critical. The talking point's critical. The script, not critical.
Yeah, the scripting never works and always comes across very, artificial, and
Yep.
that's what really shuts people down. You talked about the hierarchy of
Yeah.
communication, and one point that I didn't hit on, and I want to close with this because I think this is really important, is video follow-up. How
Yeah.
do you feel about video follow-up in today's world?
Yeah, it should not be cutting edge, but it absolutely is because still nobody is using it. At the time of this recording, we are now 2 days removed from me from a birthday, and one of the highlights of my birthday every single year is I get a video message from my friend Mike Lyon. Every single year, my client sends me a video message. Okay. Now, look, I look forward to it after a while, but here's the deal. How much does that stand out? It stands out a lot. You know why? Because nobody else sends me video messages, not just for my birthday, but any time else. If you want to stand out from everybody else, here's an idea. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Just so you know, little insider information, everybody else is sending a form email. So
Mhm.
when you stop and take the time, oh, it's going to take all of 2 minutes, by the way, take the time to record a personalized video. What are you doing? You're setting yourself apart. You're letting them know that they are worth it, that you took the time, that you're comfortable, that you're likable, all in a 2 minute investment of time at zero cost. Video should not be cutting edge, but it absolutely is. If I was going back into sales today, I would make my living off of the use of video. I cannot emphasize this enough. Whether the video is about the product, whether video is just a heartfelt thank you, whether video is interviewing a customer from the past so we can get a testimonial in there, whatever it happens to be, there are so many creative ways to use it, but it is not being used enough. And why? Because salespeople tend to be comfort addicts. They tend to stay with what they are comfortable with. So my strong suggestion, get comfortable with video. We are in the video generation and that's not going away. What can we do to increase our video literacy and really impact our customers?
Yeah, that's great advice, Jeff. Most people are afraid to be on camera, and I have found it to be very effective to send video messaging, and people open it and enjoy it.
That's
Well,
right.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and ideas on follow-up today. And for everybody who's listening on our program, make sure you reach out to Jeff, connect with him at jeffshore.com. I highly recommend getting a copy of his book. It's full of great ideas as well as strategies and execution around follow-up. And again, these are simple, in my idea, they're simple ideas that really are impactful to the sales process. So for all of us at the Sales Lab, thank you for being on today. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.